Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our friends, our clients, and our partners joining us today to our latest discussion on Whitespace Roundtable. On behalf of Whitespace, I welcome every one of you who is joining us from different parts of the world, especially from North America, Toronto, and Colombo. Again, my name is Iresh Pereira, and I'm joining from Whitespace, sitting in Colombo. And today I have my guest speaker, Vidusha Vitarana, the founding partner and the destiny architect of Luminary Learning Solutions and High Five Consultancy. So today I just want to start off by giving a small background to Whitespace and also this particular program, Whitespace Roundtable, the meaning behind it, as to the idea as to why we do it, and also to my guest speaker, Vidusha. So Whitespace is a technology solutions company. We are headquartered out of Toronto, Canada, and we are in the space of providing end-to-end technology solutions to our clients in North America and Colombo. We serve our clients in the space of business management applications, collaboration, data intelligence platforms, cybersecurity, and custom solutions. So the whole idea behind of Whitespace being a transformational IT solutions company is that we believe a lot in understanding the real challenges that our business users are facing. We don't really believe a lot in talking to technology decision makers all the time. Not that we don't talk to them, but we believe a lot in talking to non-technology decision makers who are also the business users of any technology platform, purely because of the fact that we get to understand their real challenges, the real issues that they face on a daily basis, which is also the context of this program today. So the theme that we are going to cover on the roundtable today is the digital power play. As the name represents itself, the power play is about making decisions, making the right moves at the right time, under the right circumstances. It all starts from the boardroom. We all know that. It all starts from the leadership of any organization. If you really think about it, adopting technology, adopting digital transformation starts from the top itself, not just technology. Vidusha will agree with this down the line. Any change in any organization starts from the top itself. So today we just want to spend some time talking to Vidusha about the challenges that we face in reaching out to certain leaderships, or that challenge any leadership team faces in any organization in terms of making those decisions. So before I go that, I just want to give a quick introduction to my guest speaker, Vidusha Vitarana. Not a lot of detailed introductions are needed. He's known all over the country and even in other parts of the world as well. But for what it's worth, I'm just going to introduce Vidusha to the program. Vidusha, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Iresh. Great pleasure.
Right. So Vidusha has been in the people management and HR leadership for the last 22 years, which is a long time. And out of that 22 years, 16 years he has spent solidly on training and consultancy at different levels of businesses and organizations, starting from leadership right down to the executive levels. And like I mentioned, he's also the founder of Luminary Learning Solutions, today the largest end-to-end training solutions company in Sri Lanka, and also the destiny architect of Luminary as well as High Five Consultancy. Vidusha is apart from being a trainer, a leadership coach, and a consultant, Vidusha is also an author of 17 publications, which is impressive, by the way. And he is a renowned speaker, and he's also a teacher as well as a social entrepreneur. So with a warm welcome, Vidusha, I'll welcome you again. And I just invite you to say a few words before we actually get into our topic today. And if you can share your thoughts briefly about our topic and your purview on this particular matter that we are talking about today.
Sure. So, thank you for having me for starters. But I must admit, the moment you invited me in, the first thing that came into my mind was the fact that I grew up in an era where computers were venerated. And having one was almost a status symbol than a productivity tool. So if there was a computer on your desk, that means you were somebody very important. And inside the organization, 9 times out of 10, it would have been only your managing director who actually had a PC. I'll start out on a lighter note because I know it's going to get heavy as we go on. But I remember my dad taught at the University of Srijadanapura for and worked there for nearly 37 years. And they were, I think, one of the first, apart from the University of Moratuwa, to get computers and to get computerized, so to say, and it was a big deal back then. And I remember my dad coming and telling me, and he was full of excitement saying, I got a computer. So after school, I happily went over to his office to see this brand new computer sitting on his desk. And those were the days of electronic typewriters, right? There were manual typewriters first, and then came the electronic typewriters. And Dad has the electronic typewriter in English and a singular manual typewriter and a computer, all on his one big desk, right? And he looks at the computer and turns around and says, I know I can't say this in Sinhalese. It sounds much better in Sinhalese, right? But he turns and tells me something to the effect of, even though people talk a lot about it, there's nothing much that can be done on this. Take a look at it. All it says is Windows, because people had taught him how to switch it on, but nothing more. So when you switch it on the computer, the screensaver comes and it just goes up and down saying Windows. And for the longest time, he honestly thought it was more of an ornamental purpose rather than actually a productivity tool. So the reason why I'm telling you this is because that is honestly how we look at technology even today. I know we've come a long way since then, and with a lot more sophistication. But I genuinely feel we really don't tap into the available resources and the technology that is available. Sad to say, even on a phone, take a look at the amount of applications you would use. Productivity is probably the least of the concerns. Probably the most used would be a bunch of games that you kill time with rather than become productive with. Then would be social media platforms. Then would be communications. And what would you, if you actually ask the question, how much of a support is your phone for productivity improvement? Most parents or most employees will turn around and say it's a distraction rather than a effective tool. And that sadly is the malady that we have. And I'm not saying this is true for all organizations, okay, in any form. I know there are lots of organizations that are leapfrogging because of technology. Having said that, I think the vast majority of organizations, especially medium-scale organizations that are scaling up into being large sector organizations, I think suboptimally use technology. And because I work in the leadership space and doing training and consulting and things like that, I see that a lot. And for the longest time, we've been trying to tell organizations that you can train online very effectively. But it took an entire pandemic for people to switch on to it. And if not for the pandemic, chances are we would have never done this, ever, like this. It would have always been catch a flight, come here, physical space, a massive conference, a lot of, analog technology, when we are here speaking to the rest of the world. So let's explore that. So it's something very close to my heart.
Great. I always love your analogy, Vidusha, about relating your talk always to a personal experience. I mean that tells me how good you are in putting things into context. One, number two, that also tells me how much of personal experience you had, and you have actually
Probably the wrong type of experience, unfortunately.
in fact, you have taken the time to relate all those personal experiences into your professional life, and which is great, right? So yeah, so that's a great start. In fact, for the next half an hour to 40 minutes, Vidusha, what we will spend on is talking about maybe good 3 to 4 areas, right? Pointed areas in terms of uh, the challenges that any organization will have at a leadership level inside the boardroom in terms of making that step to have a digital transformation journey, right? Like you said, picking up on what you mentioned, it actually took us a pandemic, right? A severe one, not just a simple one. We all know how serious this is. A severe pandemic for us to understand and appreciate that technology can actually help us do our day-to-day business or live our day-to-day lives. So today, technology has become a part and parcel. Excuse me, part and parcel of our lives, and now we are trying to figure out how we can use it to live, work, and play. So it's a no-brainer that every organization has to have a digital transformation journey, right? It's also a very basic fundamental to understand that every CEO or every leadership team needs to understand the importance of it and also the urgency of it, right? As much as you understand that it's important, you also need to realize that how urgent it is, right? And we all accept the fact that it starts from the top, right?
Sure.
But what I want to find out from you, Vidusha, is how does this whole journey of taking that digital transformation or technology adoption in any organization start? Is it a culture which can either flourish or perish along the way, or is it just a decision which can kill so many other belief systems around it, or which can get killed by itself along the way, or is it something we can call decisive culture, which will sustain down the line and then resurrect the organization from being a brick and mortar environment to a modern day business? What are your thoughts on that?
Right. So let me try and unpack this, right? I think one of the first things you need to understand about doing anything differently is that you need to have the conviction that it's the right thing for you. Now, the issue is whenever we throw this at any organization, let's just forget digital transformation for a moment, right? Just take transformation of anything. The issue is that we sometimes think we have a choice in it. And the sad realization at some point that organizations need to get is that the world is going to change with or without you. It's going to happen, right? And if human evolution is anything to go by, it has happened always. And at some point, there's a disruption and there's chaos. And out of it comes a new way of doing things. So from the Stone Age, here you have people moving into a more sedate life, village environment, crops being grown. So you have a farmer. And then from farming comes industrialization. Right? So all of these are transformations in human history. Now, there were cultures that turned around and said, no, man, this whole, factory kind of environment that's good for other countries, not good for us. And they've remained that way. Nothing wrong with it. I have nothing against it. All I'm saying is, if you take tribal societies that might be living in the Amazon or whatever, they live the same way they lived, ever since back then. The issue is whether they want to change or not. Now they have an issue where they are not deciding their own fate. It's being decided for them because they're sitting in a country where they cannot decide for their community what is best. The same is happening with the indigenous populations of Sri Lanka. It happened to the indigenous populations of Australia. And so it happened to the indigenous populations of America. A handful of Western Hemisphere individuals turned up in those shows, and you find that, I'm not taking sides on history, right? I'm merely saying that people didn't adopt and adapt to newer ways of doing things and got left behind. Now we can argue this philosophically, whether it should be done, shouldn't be done, is it good, is it bad, is a philosophic conversation. I'm merely talking of reality as I see it. Okay. Now, organizations face the same situation. So you have a choice. You can either decide to remain and say, look, you know what, we are perfectly fine as we are, and they might well be. Let's not get into these newfangled things, and let's just deal with it the way we always did. Now, what you need to realize is, as an organization, whether you adapt and adopt or not, the world around you is going to change. And at some point, it's going to happen where you don't have a choice but to change. So in the evolution of an organization, you always have this little point in time, this moment in time, where that decision becomes a critical decision. And I've always believed you're better off changing when you don't need to change, rather than changing when you have to change and you have no choice in changing. The analogy I always bring is that of a healthy man having unhealthy habits when you're young. Okay. So you don't have to worry about it. You douse a couple of bottles and you kind of have your little kottu roti and don't bother going to the gym. You won't have a problem until you hit about 40, 45. Now, unless you're one of those exceptional 1% of a population which has a fantastic constitution where you can abuse your body to absolute extents and still live up to be 110 years old, there are 1% of exceptions like that. But you have to be born really lucky for that. If you're the average human being, then chances are by about 40, 45, your previous sins are going to come and haunt you. And at that point, you'll get certain ailments. You'll go to the doctors and turn around, and the doctor will turn around and say, you have too much of cholesterol, you have a fatty liver, you have too much of, you're borderline diabetic. Better get this sorted out. Otherwise, you're going to have serious repercussions. You'll ignore this and say, yeah, but, I'm not going to go there. 5 years down the road, you're now diabetic. Now you have cholesterol beyond a certain point, and now you're getting, pains in your heart, and you don't know what to do with it. Now you have two choices. At that point, the doctor is not going to give you options. The doctor is going to turn around and say, open heart surgery, thank you very much. Either get this sorted out or you'll die in 2 weeks. Now, why wait? If you're an averagely intelligent human being, right? Why wait until you have a heart attack to have a healthy lifestyle? The same is true, I think, for organizations as well. Why wait until you're dysfunctional and obsolete to change? You might as well change when everything is stacked up your way. Because that way, even if you make a mistake, or two, or three, or a few, you still can come up on top. Because you have the resources, you have the timelines, you don't have to necessarily change. In fact, you are the one at the threshold of pioneering change and being the disruptor rather than being the disrupted. So that's my take on it. I think it's a very fundamental decision to make as a leadership team. Do we bite the bullet and change now, or do we wait until we have to? And as far as digital is concerned, I think we are late already, because lots of organizations have made that leapfrog and benefited from it. I think most organizations are a little late into the party. But once again, things like the pandemic has probably hastened that big time, because now you don't have a choice now. What do? How do you teach in schools? You don't have a choice. But what would have been nice is to adopt that so that you could have had some of your sessions online and have other sessions that you can't do online in person. There's no reason why we shouldn't have done that. But now that we have to, we will do it that way. And trust me, most organizations as well as schools, I think when the pandemic is over, probably go back to what it used to be all over again. So it is a choice. It's a very, very fundamental choice that we have to make. And it's wise to make it now.
Yeah, so it's a choice to create that decisive culture and make sure that you keep it that way. And
it's important to understand that there's no stopping point in this. That's the issue. See, whenever you adapt and change and you move forward, something else comes along. I want to qualify this, by the way. I'm not talking of going behind fads. That's important. Wholesome change is not a fad. One of the biggest problems organizations have is people pick up on words. Now, digital is another classic word that people throw around, right? We have no idea sometimes what digital means, but we want to go digital. We throw words like this. We want to have a people centric culture. We want to make sure that we have human capital. We want to make sure that we have strategic management. All of these are buzzwords, and they don't do anything for the organization, honestly. In fact, I think they're counterproductive to go behind a fad. I'm not talking of going behind a fad. That must be very clearly stated. What I'm talking about is fundamentally being agile enough as an organization. Agile is another buzzword that everyone uses. We want to be agile. We want to be agile. But the question is, what do you mean by being agile? Agile is an entire philosophy, isn't it? I mean, it starts with a mindset. You have to have an agile mindset to begin with. You can't have agile tools without an agile mindset, right? Um, in the same way, digital cannot be a fad. And the moment people say digital, we are talking of social media platforms and putting something on Facebook and putting something on LinkedIn. That's not digital. So if you don't understand it, first and foremost, organizations need to spend a little bit of time and truly understand these phenomena, and then decisively decide to make sure that you make that transition and that change. If you don't do that, I think you gain nothing out of it.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, you're on point, Vidusha, with that, because see, as a technology company, what we constantly experience is that I have experienced this many times in my career personally, and also at a professional level as a company. A lot of companies go and talk to the technology people, right, within the organization, but what they don't do is that they don't try and upgrade that conversation to the decision making level, right? And because of that, they don't understand how the decision makers think. Yes, obviously we need to certainly work with the people at the operational level, but at the end of the day, it's absolutely important that we understand the challenges that any leadership team might have in terms of taking the step. Coming back to just following a fad or maybe just harping on buzzwords, those have become buzzwords because we only talk about it. We never really practice them. That's why they have turned out to be buzzwords. But now it's time that we took that step to actually execute whatever that we have been talking about all this time. Otherwise, like you said, we are just falling behind. So, Vidusha, now the next point is that yes, it's a choice that you need to make, and that choice needs to be made today. And we know that it could be one of the most important and urgent matters of any business. With that decision, there could be certain other challenges that any leadership team will have to deal with, like that internal insecurity, right, and the power struggles, and also that friction that you will end up making down the line in terms of losing jobs, and or it could be the that unpreparedness to embrace technology as something that could help you do your job in the long run. And it could be the lack of willingness to learn and lack of willingness to change. So I feel that there's an element of change management and also preparation that a leadership team should do down the line to make it happen. So how do you handle these kind of frictions in a business when you really make that decision?
Again, a few things there, right? Because it's a very very vast topic of conversation. But let me try and put a few frameworks in place. The first is you have to understand that digital isn't the only transformation that needs to happen in an organization, right? There are multiple and often competing priorities. And I think it's very, very important to understand that when you are driving a business strategy into the future, when these competing priorities come into play, most of the time, what we try and do is to do a little bit of everything. And I think that's a very dangerous game to play because you get nothing out of it. Let me give you an example. So we need to make sure that we train our people and develop our people. At the same time, we need to start changing our culture. We also need to make sure that we adopt digital transformation. We also need to make sure that we change our product portfolio. Now, which one to do? We try and do a little bit of product change. We try and do a little bit of training and development somewhere. We then try and do a little bit of maybe one little piece of technology we bring in there, and we think we are going to transform the organization. It doesn't work that way. So what I try and tell organizations is to first conceptualize and project yourself into the future and ask yourself, what kind of an ecosystem do you need to create in order for people to work well? Okay. And any ecosystem isn't perfect. That's the other thing. Lots of people want to find a perfect solution, and there is none. No perfect solutions exist. Every single solution that you can think of actually has a flip side. It can go horribly wrong, right? But we assume if we bring, for example, the best system that we can find, world famous, fantastic system, that's going to solve all of our problems. It doesn't. Because just because you bring a system doesn't mean people change. And just because you change people doesn't mean the technology works. Right? These are all things that needs to combine itself. So imagine a spider web. Okay, it's a bit like a spider web. Now, all of this is interconnected at some point, and all of it plays a part. You start taking pieces of them aside, the ability for a fly to actually fly through the spider web without actually getting entangled is much higher. That's a bit like missing the mark when it comes to your objectives. If you haven't built an ecosystem that actually gets you stuck in there, the ability for these things to just float around is quite high. Nothing gets stuck, right? So the spider webs aspects of it needs to kind of at some point connect. So I think the biggest challenge organizations have is to have a uniformed, holistic approach to changing ecosystems which are interconnected, rather than looking at each one of these as projects. They are not projects. They are all-encompassing change initiatives. Now, that's one aspect, okay? I'm going to be paradoxical here, but I'm doing it purposefully. The other aspect of it is, if you look at all of these things, nothing will start. Right? Again, I don't know how to say this in English. I wish I could, Panditayata edanda yanda baya kinawani. Right? Then ඔය ඔක්කොම හිතන්න පටන් ගත්තොත් එහෙම you can never do this, right? So you can't really conceptualize and play around in your mind all the computations that can happen and the permutation that needs to be taken into consideration. You can't and then make a decision. It will never happen. You will never have perfect data either to make decisions. Now, this is the paradox you need to play around with. On the one side, you have a situation where you need to make sure that everything is interconnected. On the other side, you have a situation where if you wait for everything to fall into place, nothing is going to happen because you have to start somewhere. Now, what to do? So I always give the example of building any form of a building, right? You start with an architectural drawing, don't you? You always start with an architectural drawing. Now, you can never build a house exactly as the architect put in pencil or on a CAD diagram, right? It never works that way. Something will change when you actually start building. But that doesn't mean you start building a house saying, no need of any architectural drawings. Let's try and put a kitchen there. Now let's put a room here. Now let's put the toilet here. No, now the doors don't connect. Now what shall we do? We'll break that down and build another. Well, it doesn't work that way. No? It can, but it's stupid to do it that way. If you're building a house, you'll have a plan first, and it'll encompass everything. It'll encompass everything. So the same is true when you start driving transformation inside an organization. You have to start with that all-encompassing CAD drawing first, the holistic plan first. Would you have the resources to do all of it at the same time? Probably not. Probably not. Then prioritize it. That's fine. But when you're prioritizing, you know that you have to factor in the other aspects and elements and keep it there so that when you come into a certain point in your transition, in your transformation, you bring the others into play as well. You cannot do this as individual projects. So, answering the specific aspect of what you're referring to, which is digital transformation, the issue is you can't do digital transformation as a project. That's the issue. You have to do it as an ecosystem change. And that starts with things like mindset, the processes, the interlinks between the processes, current issues and contexts, future aspirations, and how this entire thing actually weaves together in a change initiative, and making sure people come onto the other side positively. Otherwise, your digital transformation might happen very, very well from a project perspective, but people's adoption of it will be very slow, and people might resist it and resent it. And 9 times out of 10, if that happens, whatever benefits you bring in from a digitization process doesn't actually come into fruition. It will always lag behind because people don't necessarily use it. So we can have the best system under the sun, but if it's not, it's a bit like the phone. No, I mean, take a look at this. I mean, these phones can do so much more. What do we do? At least, what do I do? As I'm guilty as charged, right? I will take a photograph ever so often. I'll use WhatsApp. I'll take a phone call. I'll send a text, and at most, I will probably use I will use some form of mail. Now, you don't really need 150,000 rupee phone for that, do you? You don't. You have a laptop. I used to have, until I was 40 years old, I used to have one of them non-smartphones. I don't know what they were called, right? You know, the phones that came before smartphones, right? I used to have one of them, one of the Nokia ones. You can make a phone call out of it. You can listen to music out of it. I had a Sony one as well. That was purely to kind of listen to music. And you could text. That's all I used it for. And it served me well. Perfectly fine. Why would you want... Now, thankfully, my friends actually got really annoyed with me for not being on any of these platforms, and turned around and on my birthday actually bought me the phone and said, Marang, for God's sake, at least for the old boys, for our batch, get on the damn group and stay there, because otherwise we don't know how to touch base with you. But my point is, if I don't change, it starts with me. I need to adopt the technology. If I don't do that, all of what you do is a waste. So both of those need to go hand in hand. So you cannot project manage a digital transformation. It needs to be an all-encompassing change initiative. And it cannot be done only with technology itself. It has to couple the technology piece and the people piece and the process piece. If those three components don't sync up, and those three together doesn't link up with the strategy piece, then the technology is like a neutral gear. Wheels are spinning, not connected.
Yeah, great. So two key points from that answer, Vidusha. One is that it's a mindset. So it's very clear that you need to have a mindset change. Obviously, for you to have the mindset change, you need to make a choice to change, right? Otherwise, things are going to get very difficult. If you are working for the company, if you are playing a leadership role, certainly it's going to be very uncomfortable for you down the line, right? And also, it's not just a project, right? It's a journey, so to speak, right? It's
Of
a
course.
journey of
Agreed.
yeah, it's a journey of changing an ecosystem. It's a journey of changing the way you live, work, and play, right? So, and also, you covered a very good point. We use this with a lot of our conversations with customers. If you want to be successful in your journey in using technology to do your business better, there are three things that you need to change. One is you need to change, relook at the processes that you want to change, and then you need to understand what platforms you want to have to use those processes better. And the third element is the people factor of it. So you covered two, and the third point I may add is the platform, because one one mistake that a lot of organizations make, In fact, we discussed this yesterday as well when we were talking about it. They end up investing into multiples of point solutions, and they get fed up with it. And
Sure.
when you go and give them a very different approach to that challenge that they have, they turn around and tell you, look, we have invested millions of dollars into this and we haven't really gained much, right? We still have the same headcount, we still have the same number of idling people doing nothing, and we still have, all those challenges. Nothing much has changed. At the end of it all, to make things worse, we end up paying millions to you guys. So one message to everybody who wants to make a decision to have technology as a tool to be successful in their business is that you should always look at that as a strategic change, which will take you on a journey to reinvent an ecosystem. And when you do that, you got to look at it from a platform perspective, not just individual solution perspective. So that's
Can,
just a
can I
little bit
just
of
can I quickly interject there, Yash? I think it's
yeah.
important for you to empathize with the fact, and even though I happily sit here and talk about it, our organization is no different. We've made that mistake ourselves. When we grow, you have to understand that the last thing on your mind is what platform to be in. You're worried about your product. You're worried about making sure that people can actually deliver on that product or that service. You're worried about headcount. You're worried about the financials. You're worried about how to make it work and therefore the process. Technology is an enabler. It's not something that stands alone. It's the glue, right, that binds it all together. Um, so so if you kind of try and do this whole technology thing as a stand, and I think one of the biggest mistakes we make, ourselves included, right, is we don't look at it from an overarching perspective. And I think part of the blame should be taken by technology providers themselves, because they look at it from the perspective of selling a product versus a solution. Let's take a look at a computer. A person you're buying a computer from is giving you a product, but I am looking at it from the perspective of getting my work done. Now, I might not need a computer in the first place. In fact, the computer might mess things up for me, right? But from a technology piece of uh, advice, or if there is no one to actually direct the organization towards that, it becomes a mess. So let's take us as an example, right? I mean, we're a very small organization comparatively, but I think that the principle remains the same. When we started growing, just the simplest of decisions to make: what computer to buy. Now, our business fundamentally is about making presentations. Our interface with any customer is through a presentation, isn't it? Training or consulting or whatever, it's down to tacit knowledge translated into a presentation. That's the mode, right? So what do you need? You need a laptop. Now, there are laptops and there are laptops, right? So what do? You go and take a look at something that you necessarily like, and looks nice, and you buy it because that's all you know. Now, if the guy who's selling you the laptop can ask you 5 simple questions and give you something that you benefit from, chances are I wouldn't leave that company ever, because I rely on you as a partner in order to solve my problem, not to give me a product that you have. There's a fundamental shift in thinking, right? So what happens to organizations when they come into this plateau where they can't really push beyond a certain point? They need that IT infrastructure coming in. Then they turn and ask their IT departments or friends or other companies, now what do we do? Can't go on like this. We can't really be analog anymore. We have to transform. What do we do? And at that point, if you make that mistake once, they say, no, once bitten, twice shy. Now we mistrust everybody. And you're not alone in this. We are the same. We find a lot of organizations wanting to do training and development. It makes perfect sense, though. You need to develop your people. But most organizations, when they talk about training, look at training as an event, nothing more. Right? It's a 1-day program, half-day program, 2-day program. But how does that develop people? into being more productive, into being more competent, into being able to deliver on the strategy. That is not ever taken into consideration. We do a training program. Now, after a while of doing this, somebody's going to ask the question, Ade, we've done all of these damn training programs, nothing happened. No. True, nothing has happened, right? Because you've gone for a training program without a process inside. Same is true for IT. We've invested all this money on IT. What has happened? Nothing has happened. In fact, it has made matters worse. It's complicated the hell out of it, right? So, just to kind of interject, I think it's very important for everyone who's interested in this sphere to appreciate the fact that unless technology companies actually view it from a solutions perspective, you're going to get a bad rap. And at some point, people are going to lose faith in the system. And that's a very dangerous place to be. And that has happened to a lot of HR companies also, training companies also, where you've gone and done things which doesn't add value. And when you go afterwards, when people ask the question, you're also one of them, right? Ultimately, that's how generalization takes place. So you're absolutely right. It is important and it's critical. Not just important, it's critical. If people are to adopt technology, you need to have a set of good role models to look up to. That's important.
Yeah. Basically, it boils down to the ability of the technology company to ask the right questions from the right people,
Correct.
right? I
Of
mean,
course.
so this is what we try to do differently. I mean, a lot of technology companies don't do this. They, like I said at the start of the session, they just stop with the technology folks, which is okay, which is perfectly fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But then up until you tap into the doors of non-technology users, right, within that company who actually end up using whatever that you want to sell, right, and as long as you're not able to relate yourself, right, to their challenges, if you're not able to ask the right questions in the most simplest form and understand their pain points, you're not going to be successful. So
True. And
that
I
is
think,
the challenge, and that's one thing we are trying to do differently.
no, that's true, Iresh, of almost any service provider.
Yeah.
Not only for technology, I think it's a fundamental mistake we all make, which is we are looking at it from a technical perspective. HR people do the same, finance people do the same, marketing people do the same. We speak jargon. We don't connect it at some point to solving a problem. But the moment we use it to solve the problem, then we become a partner. That's where we need to be.
So one golden rule in our line of business is that stop talking about your jargon. Just always talk to the customer as to how you can help them solve their problems and do their business better. That's it.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So we have about another 15 minutes, Vidusha. So I just want to touch base on the third area. Now, when we start this from the top, right? When we start from the boardroom, in fact, I have two questions here. So we'll try and break it down. The first question here is that what can we do, right? What can we do to do that change of mindsets within the boardroom? What are the things that we can do to help any leadership team to understand the importance of this change? Specifically, if you look at, let's say, for example, right, for the sake of the discussion, it could be a head of HR, it could be a head of finance, or it could be a head of operations. How can we convince them, right, that this is the way forward, and they have to get in line and support that decision at the boardroom level? So what are the things that we can do? Question number two is that how can we empower the people downstairs, right, outside the boardroom, and create champions outside the boardroom to make this happen at a lower level? Once a decision is made, obviously it comes to the execution. That's why I said at the start of it, it could be a decision that gets killed along its way down.
Correct.
How can
And
we how
most,
can we help or empower those users to be a part of this?
And most actually good strategies gets killed along the way, because exactly of that, right? I mean, whatever we might decide at the top, ultimately it's people at the bottom level who execute it. So if they are not empowered, then chances are your strategy is a beautiful document that sits and collects dust. It doesn't actually manifest. So the answer to both, in a nutshell, in one word, is credibility. And I can't speak enough of this, right? Any form of leadership requires credibility. Any form of change champion needs to have credibility. Otherwise, you've lost it. Now, the question is, how do you build credibility, especially into a new initiative like technology that is coming in? How do you make sure that you can convince the boardroom and therefore also the bottom levels to embrace this, right? So let's start with the boardroom. At that level, I think the early Greeks came up with this beautiful principle about how to convince anybody. Okay, they looked at it from a debating perspective, but we can adapt the same principles into business as well. So they talked about, first of all, logic and reason. Now, most of the time, we don't give logical answers; we give textbook answers. When we start breaking it down and asking fundamental questions, people can't answer. So you better be ready to logically answer it, not from a technology jargon perspective, not from a but 10 this and that 10, all these philosophic conversations. Write down hard go business. Number one, can you tell me 5 places where this has actually worked? Now you can't bluff at that point. The problem is we bluff. You might as well turn around and say, you know what, it hasn't. I have no examples to show up to now, because we are the cutting edge of technology. Yes, you are the guinea pig. Do you want to be one? Now, when you're testing a drug, COVID drug is a classic example. We didn't go through the normal channels, right? Now, at some point, maybe there are repercussions. God only knows. But you will do it anyway because the circumstances require you to do so. It's the only viable option we have. So the first is logic. Okay. To be able to look at it very logically. The second is the emotional connect an individual has to another individual, and likability comes there. Now, most people don't even talk about this, but the bottom line is you must be liked. Otherwise, how will you win anybody over? Right? So, logic and reason is all well and fine. But the guy who's presenting this, if he's not liked, he's a real Pandit fellow, no? Or, you say something, if you have that kind of attitude coming in, and if you're not liked, then chances are you might be making logical sense, but it doesn't go further. And finally, you also need to have professional credibility of having done that. Now, the other big issue is that a lot of people who actually put themselves up in front, if you are doing business development, they have never really delivered on this. So unfortunately, the technology people can't do business development. The business development guys don't understand technology. So within the organization itself, there's a disconnect. Forget trying to do it and implement it in somebody else's organization, right? So that disconnect is also there. So what is really important is logic and reason, emotional connect, and professional credibility. If these 3 dots connect, chances are boardrooms will listen to you. You will be able to convince them. Okay. Now, the same is true when it comes to the junior levels also, because don't forget that we have legacy. People have not been there inside the organization for just 1 year, no. They have been there for 20, 30 years, right? Now, imagine the amount of lies we've told them up to now, right? Whenever we implement systems, this is going to make life easier for you. This is, free up space, this, that, and the other, right? I mean, imagine what people said when it comes to mobile phones. They said it'll make life so much easier for us and it'll free us up to do other more important things. No, we are a slave to the phone now, right? It's almost like a part of the anatomy. And you imagine the amount of social disruption that has taken place, and negatively so, because of the mobile phone. We can't keep it away from our kids. There's all sorts of nonsense going around. Fake news is at its best because of these platforms. Those are the negatives. So when you have told it's going to work and it hasn't worked, and that has been the vast majority of times, what do you think people are going to think? It's natural for you to mistrust, right? Imagine your plight, forget anybody else. Imagine you. If you had an organization or any industry that actually, we we've done this with a lot of industries. Haven't you noticed? I mean, back during my father's time, my father was introduced to tobacco by his maths master when they finished O levels. He was 16 years old, and once their O level results had come, the maths master had come to him and said, "Now you passed O levels, no? Big man, no? Now you can smoke." Given him his first cigarette. Right? So he started smoking because of his maths master. And back then, nobody had the foggiest idea that smoking would cause cancer. In fact, the tobacco industry would have promoted almost every single major sporting event in the world. Correct? Now, and then today you have a different situation where we put on the packet itself that it causes cancer. Now, would you trust if an industry of that nature comes and tells you something? Chances are probably not, right? Now, I'm not throwing a pot shot at the tobacco industry. I'm just citing it as an example. I smoke, by the way, myself, so I can't afford to say anything. So I have nothing against the tobacco industry. I smoke. I'm a smoker. I'm one of their customers. But the point I want to make is, from thinking that it's a mark of manhood to saying it actually kills you to consume my product is like a 360-degree shift in how perception has worked. Correct? Milo. When we were going to school and playing basketball, we were encouraged to drink Milo, saying it's an energy drink. Right? Today, we quite openly accept the fact that it's not an energy drink. Right? So it's important to understand that when you as a consumer have differing messages like this coming in, your levels of mistrust is quite high, isn't it? Our levels of mistrust is quite high. So that is the same for technology. That is the same for our field as HR professionals also. What is the credibility we have to turn around and say, you know what? This works. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, logically, this is how it works. Emotionally, if you really like me, and professionally, if I can credibly tell you, you know what, trust me on this. Here's what I have done in the past. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here is how it has improved the efficiency of the people who has worked with me. Do it for 12 months and see how it goes. If you can stand as a senior management team and say that to your junior team, they will rally around you any day. And we have lots of examples like this inside organizations. And sometimes some of the most generally uncited examples. Take a look at how NSB transformed themselves. I remember going down to National Savings Bank and having to wait there for 2 hours for somebody to send a fax to some other branch and get it verified and bring it back, and my father to take money and come. Take a look at it now. The technology diffusion process at NSB is one of the best examples you can show of technology working and working fabulously well. And that's a governmental institution, one that you would never cite under normal circumstances as a brilliant example of technology diffusion inside an organization. But it probably is one of the best examples to show, because you had credible instructions given and transformation taking place. A, there was logic and reason as to why you had to do it. B, there was a certain amount of love and regard for the people who were saying it. And 3, they were able to show and credibly say, if you don't do this, we won't actually even have an organization. And to convince people that it was required. And today, they're as good as any other bank, right? From a technology perspective, they use technology, the same, probably same types of technology that everybody else uses. So those 3 aspects are important.
Excellent stuff. So we are just starting to wrap things up now. So we have only about 3 minutes to go. Just want to summarize what we discussed for the last 40 minutes to one hour. One thing is that adopting technology or embracing a technology journey is inevitable now, right? You have almost no choice in the matter because of the environment, because of the circumstances. If you don't do it, you're going to become redundant and irrelevant down the line. So it's a choice that you should make, right? And a choice that you will make to create that decisive culture to embrace it and be successful in it. Number two is a mindset change, right? If you're not changing or willing to change in your mindset, and if you're not willing to take those steps proactively, again, you're going to fail. Number three is you got to build credibility, right? You got to build credibility both inside the boardroom, right? You got to be able to commit to yourself as well as to your other members within the team, and also deliver that message very strongly to the other levels of the organization to make sure that this is coming to help them, not to harm them, because we all get haunted by this political
Or
belief that yeah.
or just to
Yes.
stop you there, if it is gonna harm them, you might as well say it.
Yes.
And sometimes there's a certain amount of harm, and we shy away from saying this. We sugarcoat things, right? Sometimes technology does mean that jobs will be lost, and we need to say it like that. Now, it's not to say that the mistake we make is we turn around and say, you know what, no, it won't affect your jobs, and then it does, and then you've lost credibility completely. Why not state the fact, you know what, technology disrupts, and if we haven't really learned how to use it and use it effectively, chances are you will be ill equipped to manage or work inside this organization in the future. So, what we will do is to make sure that you're given this 6 months to train. We'll send you for training, we'll send you for development, make use of it. But having done all of that, if you have not got the skills, you don't have a place anymore. And in that case, let us try and find you a different job somewhere else. You need to have those big conversations. You can't lie about this. If
Yeah.
you do, then it's all lost, and the whole whatever transformation that you're looking for doesn't happen.
You nailed it right on the head, Vidusha. In fact, how it can actually harm one is not being a part of it, or not supportive of that decision that the company makes, right? I mean, if you're so resistant and if you're so stuck in that political belief that it's going to harm you and kill you down the line, that means it's a misconception. But if the organization is giving you the opportunity to be a part of it, gives you enough training, and empowers you enough to go along with it, clearly you will have better prospects within the company. So, but
For sure.
the resistance to change is what kills you to sum things up. Yeah. So, and the last point is that it's a mindset change, and it's about building credibility, and it's also keeping up with it. Sustaining the change that you bring into the organization, and also going along with it, being consistent and persistent about it. Otherwise, you can't make it happen. That's where a lot of technology companies also fail. If you think about it, right? They try to show quick results to organizations, saying that you can do this, that, and the other. But at the end of the day, if you think about it, the ROI of any investment it could even take about 3 years, right? There could be certain decisions which might take more than a year, 18 months, 24 months to 36 months. Like you correctly say, you got to be honest about it, and you got to lay out all the facts on the table, and then have that conversation with the company to make that long-term decision. That's when they will also be successful at the same time.
For sure.
So, Vidusha, we are just right on time, and I love the conversation. Great points, great talk. So, I just want to ask you to say a few words before we wind up, and then we will probably meet on another day.
For sure. Now, I think in summing up, let me kind of touch a point which we shy away from most of the time whenever we have conversations about big changes, right? One of the things you must bear in mind and be very open to is that even if you do everything right, there's still a possibility of failure, and we need to open up to that. And many of the initiatives, when we run it for the first time, especially, okay. So if an organization is looking at digital transformation properly, there will be many bumps on the road, for sure, right? And if statistics are anything to go by, chances are you will have more failures than success, right? If statistics are anything to go by. But I always tell people it's a bit like marriage, statistically, marriage is a bad deal. Statistically, right? Because statistically there is more and more divorce, and things going horribly wrong is so much higher. Divorce is okay, at least it's recorded, no? So it's a failure in that sense. What about all the unrecorded monstrosities that takes place because of marriage? Unhappiness, cheating that doesn't get caught, all of these things take place, right? So if you really look at it, if you really want to advise your daughter, what will you say? Don't get married? Or will you try and equip your daughter with skill sets that are required to at least have a fighting chance of having a happy marriage? And one of those skill sets that you have to work on is the fact that you have to teach that you have to work on it. There will be problems. Now, the first sight of problem, if you had the first fight as a married couple and you left because of it, because you just had too much of a fight and you walked out of the house, it's one option. You can do that. Or you can look at it in context and say, we had a fight, let's now simmer down and let's figure out what went wrong. Let's attack the issue. Let's solve the problem. And we can continue. Now, if you ask a person who's been married for a long time and they've grown old together, and they're sitting down on a bench, watching the sunset, and holding hands, and you find these, right, ever so often at Golface Green, you have a lot of umbrellas and people underneath the umbrellas, which are very young. Ever so often you find like a 80, 90-year-old holding hands, watching the sunset, right? And it's a wonderful place to be, right? To watch them. I know you're not supposed to watch them like that, but whenever I see it, I honestly do. I sit and stop and watch because it's wonderful to see that. There's hope, right? For all the problems they would have done, there's still love, there's still regard, there's a wonderful moment of humanity to watch unfolding. Change is the same, honestly. It's like marriage. Statistically, you're on the losing side. Statistically, you're on the losing side. Chances are the change will go wrong and it won't work. But you're not there as an organization to be a statistic. You're there as an organization to defy the odds and make it happen. That's what we are there for, right? Not to be a statistic. We are there to defy the statistics and make it work nonetheless. And in that, just like marriage, I think the biggest lesson to learn is you have to accept the fact that there'll be bumps on the road. And you must be able to see it through and not give up on it. And if you have that underlying ethos, if you have that underlying principle behind you, chances are in the long term, all of this will work out. Short-term pain, yes, maybe, but in the long term, you'll be holding hands and having a good yarn about it. If you don't, well, then chances are you'll be one of those statistics. And for that, everybody's need to get involved, right? A marriage doesn't simply work because you love a person. Marriage works because of kids' involvement, parents' involvement, wider society, friends, circumstances. All of these things come into play. An organizational transformation taking place and actually working is also a lot of different factors coming in. But the one thing that you can control for yourself is you need to not give up on it. So once you've made that commitment to kind of see that through in the digital process, you must understand no matter what happens, you must see it through. And if you have that conviction and that overriding ethos, I think it will work out.
Brilliant example. I mean, statistically, I agree with you. Marriage is bad and it's also hard, right?
Very.
So, but the right thing is to choose your heart, right?
Yeah.
Which is to fight it and be happy and
Make it
successful
work.
in the long term.
And make it work.
Make it work. And another classic example is to try and stay alive in the pandemic. wear the
For
mask,
sure.
be safe, right?
For sure.
And that is very hard. A lot of people find it difficult, but you have no choice in the matter, right?
For sure.
But you got to choose your heart, which is to do the right thing, right? And then stay alive and maybe live the rest of the years happily. Yeah.
For sure.
So great talk, Vidusha. Thank you very much for
You're welcome.
joining us today. You spent good 1 hour with us,
Thank
and
you.
you touch base a very challenging, a very salient topic with the absolute ease, which I love about your way of dealing with certain topics, and because it's a very practical but a less spoken topic, I would say, right? How can a leadership team execute that digital transformation journey and make sure that it works down the line the organization? So that is something we believe, and thank you very much for supporting the cause and being a part of this conversation. So, folks, we are signing off from another great talk with Vidushanatha Vitarana from Whitespace Roundtable Digital Power Play. Until we see you next time, stay safe and take care. Thank you very much.